Here we go. Okay. So, good evening. All right, some interesting comments here. Okay, folks. Let's see. So tonight's a question and answer session. I've had a couple on Sunday, but I don't think I've ever had one on a Wednesday night, but I could be mistaken. I don't know. Anyway, there are some interesting questions came in, and you can still ask any questions that you want by typing into the chat. If you don't have the chat, put your mouse along the bottom column of the bottom of this picture, and you'll probably see over there, second from the right, I think that says chat. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same on the on your screen, but that's where it should be. And then just click on that, and the chat will come up, and then you can type your question in. And hopefully I'll get to most of the questions tonight, and not all of them. Okay. So one question, can the past be altered by human agency? Can the past be altered by human beings? Okay. This question was actually, there's another question which is sort of similar, and another question that came in, what do we mean when we say before the world was created? For time is a created phenomenon. That is correct. So they're two sort of related questions, really. Okay, let's talk about, first of all, the concept of time. The way the Torah sees the time is that time is created. There was no time before creation at all, right? Time is a measurement. We find out much later on. Time is a measurement of space, but this was already well known in Kabbalah, in Kabbalistic terminology, and in Kabbalistic works, way before Einstein came out with it. It was a well-known phenomenon. Even Maimonides talks about it, and which he lived in the 1100s. And there are many works that discuss this whole idea of time. In Kabbalah, it is very clear that there are certain levels where time is a factor and certain levels where time is not a factor. Now, I'll explain what that means. In other words, there are certain levels that are beyond time, beyond created time. There's no such concept as time over there. Now, in the lower world, in the lower, the world of, in the physical world, obviously, in our physical world, which is the lowest part of the world of Asiya. Asiya is the first spiritual world. And in the world of Yetzirah, so there is a concept of time. Time being sequential and going in one direction. However, in the world of Bria, there is no concept of time as such, but there is something called Seder Zmanim. Seder Zmanim means time in the sense of order. There's order. In other words, one thing precedes and another thing follows, right? There's, but not time to be measured in the way that we measure it, which I'll discuss in a minute. In the world of Atzilut, there's already no concept of time, because the world of Atzilut is not created. Time only begins with creation. It doesn't begin higher than creation. So, when it comes to the world of Atzilut, there is no time. Now, before I answer your question about whether time can be altered by human agency, let's just explain how time works. What is the measurement of time? So the basic measurement of time, the way Kabbalah explains it, is that life force comes into the world. It goes through the entire system of creation. In other words, from the world of Bria through the world of Yetzirah, through the world of Asiya to our physical world. It sort of courses through, but it doesn't come through like a flow. It comes through in spurts. Or if you would rather say it like this, it comes through in pulses. It pulses through. The life force pulses into the system, circulates around the system, and returns to its original source. Then the next force comes in, the next level of mind. We can see, I actually spoke about this last week in the concept of the new year. That happens on a much grander scale, but from moment to moment, this life force is in a state of constant flux, coming in and returning, coming and returning. This is called Ratzor Veshov in Kabbalah. V'hachayot ratzov v'shov, in the vision of Ezekiel, Yechezkel, when he speaks about the chariot. So he says that this chariot, and the chariot is just simply a vehicle for godliness, what was revealing godliness in that particular world, which is the world of Yetzirah, the second world, the second plane of reality from the bottom. There's, again, 5 planes of reality. Again, starting with Asiya, Yetzirah, Bria, Atzilut, and then there's Adam Kadmon, which we're not going to speak about right now, but 5 planes of reality. And so in the plane of reality called Yetzirah, in the world of formation, the world of Yetzirah, so he sees this vehicle of godliness, which he calls the chariot. And it says there, and this is obviously meant to be, it's not meant to be taken literally, it's meant to be taken figuratively. He says that the chariot is being pulled by these animals that are sort of pulling the chariot along, so to speak. And it says, the verse says, "V'hachayot ratzov v'shov," which literally translated would mean that the animals, these wild animals, are pulling the chariot along. However, in Kabbalah, that's explained. Don't read it as chayot, chayot meaning animals, but v'hachayut. The life force is in a state of constant flux, a state of constant coming and going, or coming and going and returning. Ratzor means returning to its original source, v'shov, and coming back down again. Now, this life force that's constantly in a state of flux, of going and returning, hachayot ratzor v'shov, hachayut, read it as hachayut ratzor v'shov, it's running and returning. So these are different permutations. Every time there's a new influx of life into the system, it's a new permutation of various divine names, new permutations of divine names, whether it's on a monthly permutation or a weekly permutation, a daily permutation, hourly permutation, and a moment-to-moment permutation. But as the life force comes in and returns, so there's a gap between the coming in of the life force and the coming in of the next life force. That's what measures time according to Kabbalah. The gap between one shov and the next shov is what measures time. Between one impulse coming into the system and the next impulse, that's the smallest measurement of time. That's called a moment in Kabbalah. Now, every individual has their own clock, obviously, which is based on your pulse. Your pulse is your own internal clock. Your pulse, which is basically a manifestation of your heartbeat. The pulse in your wrist or your neck or whatever is a manifestation of your heartbeat. And the heart doesn't beat by itself. The heart beats because of a signal from the brain, right? And the signal from the brain comes from above. That signal comes into the brain, into Chokhmah. V'ha-Chokhmah Techaya Ba'aleh. Chokhmah gives chayus, right? But Chokhmah is also called Yesh Mi'ayin. The Chokhmah is in a constant state of coming into being. And that coming into being is what pulses the heart, which pulses the pulses, and that's what gives a person his own sort of time frame. Okay. So having said all that, now we can ask the question, can the past be altered by human agency? Well, we can't literally go back in time if we're in the system of time. But if one gets beyond the system of time, then it is possible to change time by human agency. There's very few human beings that can do that in a general sense. Only those who are in the world of Atzilut can sort of go back and change things, because there's no, in the world of Atzilut, there is no sequential time. It's all happening all the time, all at once. All of time is encapsulated in one, it's all going on at the same time, so to speak. There's no linear progression of time in the world of Atzilut. And the various Hasidic works talk about changing the past through doing tshuva, through Tshuva means returning. It's usually translated as repentance, but repentance has a very sort of morose and unhappy quality about it. We much rather call it returning, going back home. I think I mentioned the story once before about the famous Hasidic Rebbe named Moshe Leib of Sassov. Once he was on a boat traveling somewhere, and there was a storm at sea, and looked like the boat was going to capsize. So the captain said, "Everyone start praying, because we're about to capsize and we're all going to drown." In any event, everyone starts, praying and so on and so forth. And then the gabbai, the attendant of Rav Moshe Leib Sassov, can't find his Rebbe. He doesn't know where he is. Maybe he got washed overboard. So panic-stricken, he goes and he's looking everywhere, and eventually finds him down in the hold, right on the bottom of the ship, and he's dancing and he's happy and so on and so forth. And he asked Moshe Leib, "You must have lost your marbles. Like, what's going on? Rebbe, did you lose it? What happened?" So he said, "No, I'm just happy because I'm going home to my father," so to speak. If we're all going to drown, so I'm going home. So why shouldn't I be happy? Wouldn't you be happy if you're going home? In any event, so that's the a person who's going home, who does tshuva, can rectify the past, can change the past. Now, the Zohar explains that it's not easy to change. It's possible to atone for the past, but to actually change the past is quite a lofty level. It's not so simple. But that's called when a person's transgressions become his merits. Now, it's a long and lengthy explanation. I don't really want to go into it too much now, but that's definitely a possibility that people can do. Everyone could do that. Everybody can do it. Demands a lot of effort, but it's possible to return and therefore change the past in that way. Now, if a person does manage to achieve this, if he does manage to change the past in some way, so in some sense or another, he really becomes a new person. He's a different person, not the same person that he was before. But so the past can be altered by human agency. Usually, in the case of tzaddikim, this is straightforward. In the case of everybody else, one has to go home, so to speak. One has to lift one's soul up to a level that is beyond time, and where one can rectify all those things in the past that need rectification. Okay. So that also answers the question of what do we mean when we say before the world was created. Time began at a certain moment, so when we say before time began, yes, it's no before on the clock, but in a theoretical sense we can understand what we mean. In other words, something that preceded creation in the sense that there was nothing and then there was something, right? So, of course, in human terminology, it's difficult to say how creation, if time started with creation, how can we say before? But that's the difficulties of human language. It's not because such a concept can't exist. There can be such a concept. Like, for instance, the first real number, and mathematicians will correct me here, first real number is 1, right? But you can have a -1 as well. You can have a -1. Like, what's a -1? Does a -1 actually exist? Is it something? Is it there? Well, it's a negative thing, so it doesn't really exist. A negative number doesn't exist. 1 corresponds to one object. A -1, what corresponds to a negative object? There's no object. It's a negative. So theoretically, we could understand how the same thing could work in terms of time. Another question about which things which can exist or not exist simultaneously. Also notions which can both be true and false as well. Just to use a previous analogy, things that exist or do not exist simultaneously. Yes, of course, that That can happen, but it depends on what one means by existence. In other words, something can exist in one plane of reality and not exist in another plane of reality. For example, physical objects exist in this plane of reality, but they don't exist in the plane of reality called the world of Atzilut. They don't exist as physical objects. And it's kind of easy to understand that if we, again, take our analogy of numbers and things like that. When you're teaching a child numbers, you want to teach them how to add two numbers together or whatever. So you would, for example, you would say, okay, he has one apple and he has another apple. So one apple and one apple makes two apples. Good. Okay. And one orange, two oranges. Okay, fine. One pencil, two pencils. And so you teach the child, eventually 1x plus 1x equals 2x. Now, can anyone find where that 1x is? Is there a place where we find, get your telescope or your microscope and try and find the one? No, it doesn't. It exists in the world of thought. It doesn't exist in reality. An apple exists in reality. But the number one doesn't exist in the same plane of reality as the apple. Therefore, we could say that in the plane of reality of numbers, theoretical numbers, like 1x or 2x, apples don't exist, right? So we could always talk about a thing existing and not existing at the same time. Yes, this single apple has a quality of oneness to it. Yeah, but that quality of oneness is not necessarily something that's related to apples. Okay? So they exist simultaneously in two different worlds, as one apple and as one number, right? And if you want to take it in to its logical conclusion, in the world of numbers, apples don't exist. In the world of apples, numbers don't really exist. Numbers are property which we add to, so to speak, to the apple. It's a way of describing. It's a description. I think can also be true and false. It can be true and false at the same time, but not in the same respect, not in the same world. Right? For example, the Kabbalah talks about, and in general the Torah talks about, there's various verses that describe truth. One of them is Sfat Emet Tikon La'ad. The lips of truth will continue forever, right? Will be established forever. Other verses talk about other descriptions of truth. Now, what's the lips of truth? In other words, the lips of truth are truth in a certain statement. But yeah, I'm sorry, but I was just looking if there was a question over there. But it's not ultimate truth. It's truth as it appears in a statement. So the statement, for example, the statement, it is raining now, is true right now in Chicago, where I live. It is raining outside, or at least it was a half hour ago. I assume it still is. It's true in Chicago, but it might not be true in Dallas or in, I don't know, in California somewhere, whatever, right? Somewhere else, it might not be true. But for a thing to be true in the same respect and in the same way, in every way, true and false at the same time, well, that I think does not exist. It can be true and false in the same respect at the same time, in regard to the same idea. Okay? So I think that probably answers that question. Another question, how does Kabbalistic thinking relate to Occam's razor? Now, Occam's razor has various descriptions, but basically the most simple description of Occam's razor is from William of Occam, or at least that's people say that this theory or this idea comes from William of Occam, who was a priest who lived in the 1400s, I think, something like that. Occam's razor was that the simplest explanation is usually the most plausible one, and usually the most apt one. The simplest explanation is usually the best one. The simplest explanation is the best one. Interestingly enough, if you look at the history of the idea of Occam's razor, that the simplest explanation is the best one. So there are those that attributed it originally to Maimonides. There are those that say that it came from somebody else before that as well, but they say that it's Occam's razor is the simplest explanation, is probably the true one or the most plausible one, and so on. Now, how does Kabbalistic thinking relate to Occam's razor? I'm not sure how we would apply the simplest explanation is the right. That's Kabbalistic thinking is not simplistic. It's, in fact, it's very complex. It's very complex, but it's a complex description of things which we experience. And since the experience itself is complex, this description usually also has to be complex. That doesn't mean that if there are two possible explanations of something, we take the more complicated one necessarily. We would probably give the simpler one more validity because A, it's easier to understand, and B, God doesn't make things more complicated than they need to be. So I think the original Occam's razor was really God's. It doesn't make them more complicated than they need to be. Okay, so in Kabbalistic thinking, Occam's razor is not really so much of an issue, because Kabbalistic thinking is received thinking. Where it is more of an issue is in Talmudic thinking. In Talmudic thinking, Occam's razor is a basic given understanding of how things go. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one. If you go through Talmud, you'll see that that's in fact always the methodology that's used, is to first look at the simplest explanation of something before going to more complex things, and only if necessary. So Occam's razor is part of Talmudic thinking. The formulation, they say later on, the formulation of it was in the works of Maimonides, but Talmudic thinking, which goes back to 2nd century Babylon, where the Talmud was composed, 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries, that is the Talmudic dictum, Occam's razor, essentially. One more question. Is it reasonable to study Torah study the sword, the secrets of Kabbalah, without learning and firm understanding of lower levels of Torah? No. It is preferable. It is preferable to at least learn them at the same time. However, one could ask the question in a slightly different way. Is it necessary, and I'm not making a fool of it, I'm not trying to parody this, and I'm not trying to make anyone look foolish, I'm just asking it as a legitimate question. Is it necessary to have a soul before you have a body? Now, Kabbalistic teaching are usually compared, or very often compared to the soul. In fact, the Zohar calls the Kabbalistic teachings Nishmasa D'Oraisa, Nishmata D'Oraita, the soul of the Torah. Whereas the actual mitzvot, or the halachot, the Jewish law, is called Gufa the Torah, the body. So can you have a soul without a body? Can you have a body without a soul? Now, you can have a soul without a body, and in fact, the soul exists in very high levels prior to its coming down into the body. But the body can exist without a soul, but then it's a lifeless body. Similarly, in Torah, yes, you can have a body without a soul. You can have the other dimensions of Torah, the simple, straightforward explanation of Torah, or things that are hinted to, or moralistic teachings, and so on and so forth, which is called drash. All of these things are available, but unless you have the soul, it's kind of a dead body. Now, it's not completely dead, but it's certainly not very lively. So it's possible to have one without the other, but not necessarily advisable. It's not advisable. So to answer your question, is it reasonable to study Torah, the sword, the secrets of Torah, without learning and firm understanding of lower levels of Torah? They can be done at the same time. Just as when the soul comes to the body, that's when the person becomes alive. You can do things at the same time. Learn about the other dimensions of Torah at the same time as learning about the inner dimension, the soul, so to speak, of the Torah. Okay, I hope that answers that question. Again, if you have further questions, you can always answer follow-up questions or whatever. Okay, now some of the ones that just came in now. Okay, let's have a look here. Let's have a look. Can a spiritual teacher merge with someone to help them in their awareness and spiritual understanding? Absolutely. Absolutely. That is a very well-known concept in Kabbalah, which is called Ibur, or Ibur Nishmas Hatzadik. When the soul of a person, which the Arizal explains, either alive or dead, comes to, it becomes impregnated, so to speak, in another person's soul to lead them to a higher level, called Ibur Nishmas HaTzadik. Now, this is not something that we work towards. What we try to work towards is there's 4 levels. I've spoken about this before, probably on many occasions. There are 4 levels of divine inspiration. The lowest level is dreams, and then there's Elijah, with the appearance of Elijah. Eliyahu Novi comes to a person and either teaches him a certain teaching, or perhaps in certain circumstances will rescue the person from a very grave danger. Then there comes a Magid. A Magid is a spiritual teacher who teaches a person certain aspects of Torah, sometimes the secrets of Torah, which Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, had a Magid. He had the spiritual teacher who would teach him on a daily basis. And he, in fact, wrote a whole book about it called Magid Meisharim, right? The straightforward, or the forthright Magid, the forthright teacher, the spiritual teacher who taught him everything he knew, basically, in Kabbalah. And then there is the two highest levels of divine inspiration, Ruach HaKodesh, are when the essence of a person's soul, or the root of a person's soul, becomes revealed to him or her. And the highest level is when the soul of another tzaddik, another righteous person, enters into that person's soul and lifts it up to a higher level than it could have reached on its own. Okay, so the intention is always to attempt to reach to the level of the root of one's own soul. In other words, to become who you really are. As it says about Abraham Avinu, Lech lecha me'atzcha moladcha be'etz avicha, go, literally go towards yourself, which Hasidic teachings and Kabbalistic teachings explain means go to your higher self, to your upper self, to the root of your soul. Move towards, go on the journey towards the root of your soul, that it should become revealed. So, a spiritual teacher does merge and can merge with someone and help them in their awareness and spiritual understanding, yes. There was another question before that I missed. Is 6,000 years our general timeline? And if so, how do we know this? It's a rather complicated, it is a kind of a complicated calculation. But basically the calculation is based on human history. It's based on human history. There are those that say, and I'm not saying that they're necessarily right, but there are those that say that when we count the years of creation from the beginning of creation, it's really counted from the beginning of the creation of man, the creation of Adam. That's when time begins. Because before that, for all the other creations, time was sort of an irrelevant fact that they can't conceive. Other creatures couldn't conceive of time. So the 6,000 years is talking about from the time of the creation of Adam. On the other hand, there are those that say that the 6,000 years is a derivative of the 6 sfirot which define time and space. The 6 sfirot of Zer and Pin. Right, the 6 sfirot of Zer and Pin, from Chesed to Yesod. and that's the 6,000 years. Interestingly enough, when the Zohar analyzes the creation that was created in 6 days, it says Kish. The Zohar is very explicit in its examination of the words that are used in the Torah, in the Bible. And the words that are, it says like this is the biblical quote. Ki sheshet yamim asa Hashem et hashamayim et haaretz. In 6 days, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, when it says, we translate it as in 6 days. But the Zohar says, no, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say ki be sheshet yamim, in 6 days. It says sheshet yamim. God created the world with 6 qualities, which we call days. In other words, 6 types of revelation. And these 6 types of revelation are the unfolding of the various, the 6 sfirot that we mentioned before, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, through Malchut in time, right? In Malchut is the primary sfira of time. So these things unfold in time, in Malchut. And so the 6,000 years comes from these levels of the sfirot, of the 6 sfirot of Zer and Pin. Okay, I hope that answers that. The shattering of the soul left roots in Atzilut, where there's no time, but animals, vegetables, stars, etc. all occur here. Does that mean that the root of our souls was created before what was created during the first 5 days of creation? In that case, the shattering occurred on the 6th day. No, the shattering occurred before the 6 days of the world of Tikkun. The 6 days, well, the 6 days of the world of Tikkun, right? The shattering of the world of Tohu occurred before that. But the soul preceded all of those things. The soul preceded all of them, yes. So, in fact, the Midrash Rabbah, explains that when God thought about creating the world, so he consulted the souls, right? Meaning to say that souls already existed. Since souls are part of God above, as it says in Tanya, 2nd chapter, so therefore, since souls are part of God above, they existed before time, before creation, and God, so to speak, consulted with the souls, will you become souls in bodies later on and do what it is that I want you to do? And if yes, then I will create the world. Okay. And the shattering of the vessels occurred before the 6 days of creation that it talks about. Let me just explain that. Right at the beginning of Genesis, it starts off like this. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. So after the first sentence of the Bible, of the Torah, He created heavens and earth. Then it says, the creation was waste and void. Tohu vavohu, and darkness. That waste and void and darkness was the shattering of the vessels of Tohu, which preceded creation. Only after that does it say, Vayomalkim yihi or, there shall be light. That there shall be light is the beginning of the world of Tikkun. So the world of Tohu precedes the world of Tikkun, and Tikkun is the rectification of the world of Tohu. So the shattering happened before time. If you go back in time, today actually, the 25th of Elul was the first day of creation. If the Jewish New Year, which is on Rosh Hashanah, was the 6th day of creation, then today was the first day of creation. And if we go back in time, theoretically, 7 days from the first day of creation, we get to the 18th of Elul, 18th of Elul being the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov. Interesting idea. In any event, next question. Like a hummingbird feeder, we make them with fake plastic flowers. This will help the hummingbird identify them as nectar. Are we sure this is necessary for them to know the nectar? And does the Creator do this with us as well? physical or other worlds? Interesting question. In other words, does God create a world which may look fake, but it's really there for our own good? I would say that God creates a world which is really there for our own good, because that's what he said. God created the world for mankind. He created the world for man. But I don't think you could say it's a fake world, in the sense that it does say, there's a verse in the Torah that says God created the world. Bereshit bara Elokim, in the beginning God created, right? Which, by the way, is interpreted as God created the beginning in some places. God created the beginning. But in any event, in the beginning God created means that the world does actually exist. It's not a dream, or it's not a facade, or it's a reality, but it's only a certain plane of reality. It's not all of reality. So therefore, our Creator does do this with us. He creates a world in order for us to be able to, for us to be able to do what it is that He wanted us to do in this world. In other words, to do what He wanted the world for, which is to reveal godliness in the world. All right, another question. Isn't there a reference that a day and a year are like the seventh, or alike, so the seventh day rests all the 6 times on the last one, which could be rest? Yes, correct. A day and a year are alike in the sense that just as the seventh day is the Sabbath day, so you have the seventh year, which is the Sabbath, which is the Sabbath year. It's actually called the Sabbath year, Shabbat Shabbaton Yelachem, right? It's when we're talking about the Shemitah year, the seventh year of the cycle, the agricultural cycle, is treated as if it's the Sabbath for the fields and so on. We don't plow, we don't reap, we don't sow, and so on and so forth in the fields in the seventh year. And similarly, the seventh millennium, after the first 6 millennium, is also called Shabbat. Yom Shekula Shabbat U'Menucha L'Chai Olamim. Yeah, that's the day that is called Shabbat and is rest for eternity. It's eternal rest. Not that we're not talking about after death. It's a state of being that's eternal, in eternal rest. It's not running anywhere. It's not changing. It's in a state of eternal being and rest, essentially. It said the 25th day of Elul carries its energy of creation of existence, with it energy of creation of existence. What is implied? Well, when any event takes place, when it comes around to the anniversary of that event on the same day the following year, so the event the event in a sense repeats itself if we're sensitive to it. As the Arizal explains on this on the verse, Hayomim ha'elu nizkarim v'na'asim. These days are made and remembered. Remembered and made. Nizkarim v'na'asim. These days are remembered and made. So the Arizal says, if we remember them, then we make them. That's how we make them. We remake them, in other words. If we commemorate the day as being a day of creation, then it becomes again a day of creation. It becomes a day of special existence. I'm not sure that answers the question, but hopefully it does. All right, any other questions? Any other questions? Apparently not. Let me just see if some came to the email that I didn't see before. Nope. It looks like there are no other questions. Okay. Oh, here's one. Yeah, any Kabbalistic insights about blowing the shofar? Well, you probably know the story about the first Chabad Rebbe, Mishneh Zalman Eliade, and the successor to the Baal Shem Tov was the Maggid Mezrich. one of the Maggid Mezrich asked that one of his students come and learn the kavanot, learn all the intentions, the special intentions of blowing the shofar, and he would teach them to him for that, the upcoming Jewish New Year, for Rosh Hashanah. So the Alter Rebbe, the Rabbi Shneur Zalman Liadi, the first Chabad Rebbe, volunteered. So the Maggid taught him all of the kavanot, all of the divine intentions that you're supposed to have when blowing the shofar. And he said, okay, now blow the shofar. The Maggid told the Alter Rebbe, blow the shofar with those intentions in mind. So the Alter Rebbe said, I don't know how to blow shofar. The actual deed of blowing the shofar, I don't know how to do. Later on, at some other point in time, he explained. So the Maggid said to him, so why did you ask me to teach you the kavanot? I said, I wanted to learn them. Why not? But later on, he explained why it is that he didn't know how to blow shofar, because he said that's something you do when you're a child. And I was never a child. That's what he said. It's something you do when you're a child, and I was never a child. Okay. Kabbalistic insights about blowing the shofar. The whole idea of blowing the shofar is really called Rachamim Rabim, Hitorerut Rachamim Rabim, the arousal of tremendous compassion from above. The sound of the shofar represents the cry of a person's heart, the sincere cry to want to become closer. To want to become closer. And that arouses God's compassion, and the person is brought closer. That's what the shofar is all about, and that's the only kavanah that you need. That's the only intention that you need to have in mind. I want to get closer, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Maybe a tall order, but that's what's on the menu. Okay. Let's see. Next. Thanks for allowing the question and answer. You're welcome. Send it to everybody. Okay. So it looks like that's the end of the questions, I assume. So everybody have a great Rosh Hashanah, as we say, the greeting. And there will not be a class on this coming Sunday, and there won't be a class coming Wednesday. We will see about classes the following week. All right, that's it. I'll post that up on YouTube and on the website. All the best. Have a good one. Bye now.